All right, so if we adopt a kitty cat, what do you have to do to take care of it?
Get a toy.
That's a great idea. What else besides playing with toys do we have to do with the kitty cat?
Oh, I know. We can buy 2 kitty cats.
What?
2.
All right, now you're just pushing your luck, kiddo. Welcome to Toddling the Stacks, a human-produced children's literature podcast where we delve the archive for forgotten treasures to help you make sense of this impossibly large body of work and, hopefully, find some new favorites for your kid. I'm your host, Sean, an Ivy League English PhD with a toddler girl called Adeline, who is somehow even more critical of books than I am. Today we're going to be looking at 2023's The Kitten Story, a mostly true tale, that's T-A-L-E for those of you listening at home, written by Emily Jenkins and illustrated by Brittany Chickasee. Jenkins is a fellow 19th centuryist whose dissertation at Columbia focused on the illustrated novel from 1890 to 1914, which means that her focus was much more tightly organized and disciplined than mine was. She has some awards under her belt, including a Horn Honor. And Chickasee is a librarian who says she loves gritty pastel textures, the soft glow of watercolor, and the subtle color variations of natural media. That's a powerhouse combo at the helm for this picture book, but despite its merits and winning a few nods itself, including exceptional reviews from Kirkus and the Horn Book, who are huge players in this space, The Kitten Story sits at only 11 total reviews on Amazon and only 185 on Goodreads. This has me thinking about the industry as a whole, how books become accepted for publication, how authors are paired with illustrators, how prestigious reviewers like Kirkus and the Horn Book choose which books they'll review, how libraries choose which books to order, which to display, which to select for story times, how educators become aware of text and make similar decisions, and conversely, how the parents and the public do that. And remember, I started this podcast because I felt unnerved by just the sheer mass of children's books in our local libraries, and I assumed that many others, without advanced degrees in literary studies, probably felt even more at sea. And I had no idea where to even begin in picking text for Adeline. And as we saw last week with The Gift of Ramadan, another randomly selected text, I often still don't. Even with incredible university access to periodicals and a very well-funded local library system, I don't have access to any of the major periodicals or players in children's literature. Nor can I afford to spend hundreds of dollars to get that access as a single subscriber. Not that I bemoan them charging that, but I get it, but it is a very difficult realm to get into. And what if your local school or library system can't provide that for its teachers or librarians? That's kind of a familiar disconnect between professional and private discourse networks, between the academy and the public, but it's one that I nevertheless lament. That's probably a concern for another day, though. If none of that is familiar, what may nevertheless be familiar for you is the plot of The Kitten Story. I feel like it's happened to many families at some point or another. Somehow the notion of getting a cat floats into the zeitgeist, and nothing can sate it but getting a cat. One of the few things I can remember from my early childhood is the demands I made for a teenage cat, which was ultimately fulfilled with a lithe little ball of gray fluff named Josh, who would, in time, become a bruiser of a tomcat rather, who could vocalize the word out. Later in life, when I came to live with my dad, barn cats were endemic, presenting in strange, sort of ancestral generations, like something out of a Faulkner novel, or worse, a Faulkner movie script. Luckily, the family from this story is a bit better prepared than that. It's just a mom, a dad, and 2 little girls, Rosie and Tulip, who decide one day that life would be better with a cat. They approach the problem collectively, or at least allegedly they do. Dad wants an older cat since it'll be a known quantity as well. Everyone else, predictably, wants a kitten. And a similar collectivism decides the name, Nigel, of all things, with Dad again proving the lone dissenter. Under this mandate, Mom and Rosie set off for a local animal rescue, only to find that it has ceased operations. The disappointment of the two young children upon finding this is palpable and familiar, because isn't it always the case that when we're most excited for a thing, the silliest obstacles stumble into our path and shut it down? Especially when you're a kid, this seems to happen with everything. There's some reason it can't happen today. Recognizing this, Mom takes a day off from work to go to another shelter solo. And there, amidst the plethora of kittens, which clearly fit the brief, she spies a new arrival still locked away in the cat carrier in which he came. And it's here, of course, as we might expect, that the best laid plans of mice and men come tumbling apart. The cat isn't cute. It's not a kitten. It's not even small. But he's curious and he's bright, and he seems a little overwhelmed at his situation. So Mom pops him out and, of course, falls in love. Engaging in a bit of wholly undemocratic, fully unilateral decision-making, she adopts the cat, and because snow has begun to fall outside as she leaves, she names him Blizzard. Once home, none of Blizzard's shortcomings seem to matter. Despite their plans falling by the wayside, everyone is happy, crowding around a very content kitty. Throughout, the illustrations, which are done in Procreate, offer a great deal of texture, through visible underdrawings and shading that at times approaches the depth of paint. And there's a softness to these images that suggests impressionism and evokes the perpetually gray melancholy of winter light. The effect is calming, somehow rhythmic, like an old television show shot in very soft focus, but also with pro-mist filters. Think Star Trek, the original series here. And for those watching, you'll see that the backgrounds often blend away, suggesting an entire universe of lived lives within the haloed suburban houses behind. I particularly love the long grass of the abandoned shelter and the way that the snow of the previous frame invades the home when Mom and Rosie arrive with their icy news of adoption failure. At the same time, some lines are tack sharp, as with the cages in the animal shelter or the pattern on the family's rugs. This variety helps, whether it's intentional or not, in a small way, to ground the images in a fixed reality of light, thus avoiding an actual lapse into impressionism. The Kitten Story is Chickassee's first children's book. She's done 3 since, one of her own, which we've requested from our local library. We're very excited to see more from her. So I want to return to that unilateral action by Mom that I mentioned earlier, because it got me thinking about narration in a way that makes the story a little more fun. If it's been a minute since English class, or if you've never had one, here's a quick refresher of the basics. The narrator is nothing more or less than the voice through which the story we're reading is parsed. Sometimes narrators are invisible. Sometimes they're characters in the story. Narration, the act of storytelling that narrators perform, has a grammatical person and a grammatical tense, usually some form of past, present, or future. Person is determined by viewpoint, which determines the pronouns used and delineates the kind of information available to that narrator. These are all important considerations. For person, there are 3 options, and you probably know these: first person, second person, and third. You'll see a lot of I pronouns in first-person narration because it's one person, the narrator, telling a second person, that's you, a story about something the first person experienced or knows. A second person is far less common. It's where that second person is telling you the story, but it's about you, so they use you pronouns a lot. Most stories, however, are third-person narration, where someone outside of a group is telling a story about the people, or whatever, inside of it. This is where you'll see very common constructions like he cried or she said. These are markers of third-person narration. Now, narrators can be omniscient, meaning they know everything that's happening in the story, or they can be limited, meaning that some things are obscured even to them. And the invisible narrators of many stories are wholly objective and omniscient. But the closer a narrator gets to involving themselves in the story, the more likely they are to have a limited and subjective viewpoint. And famously, narrators can be unreliable. If you grew up in Maryland, like I did, you were fed a steady diet of Edgar Poe and his drunken, drug-addled, or mentally imperiled narrators who couldn't be trusted to convey their stories truthfully. This is one way to have fantastical things happen in a story without stretching the audience's willingness to suspend disbelief too far. The Kitten Story's narrator is the family's mom. She's firmly embedded in the story. She uses I pronouns to describe her role in the action. She knows everything that's going on. And I would argue, though playfully, this isn't a serious argument, that her narration style is a pretty unique one. I think that she's a first-person, omniscient narrator who is also unreliable. First person seems pretty straightforward and undeniable. Omniscient might ruffle some feathers. A truly omniscient narrator, for instance, would probably know that the first animal shelter was closed before being told by a stranger on the street. But within the realm of her story, Mom knows everything there is to know. But is she unreliable? The decision to get a cat consists entirely of we pronouns. We is the first person plural because it includes the first person, the I, and other people as well. We decided life would be better if we got a cat, the narrator tells us, moving on to describe the communal meeting that would settle the small stuff like the name and age of that cat. That conversation is long and contentious, we're told. I'm not boring you with the whole thing, Mom says, deciding what information to parse out and what not to. She does the same thing later with her own family when Daddy and Tulip don't come to the first shelter. Less fighting that way, she tells us. This is the same phrase she uses when she casually mentions dropping the name Nigel in favor of Blizzard. She doesn't tell anyone because there's less fighting that way. These three instances show that our narrator is adept at understanding the flow of information, how it will impact her audience, and how to moderate that flow in order to achieve her desires. Arguably, she uses information transactionally, like capital, like manipulating a narrative market. That is what makes her unreliable. I know I go a little overboard and hyperbolic with my comprehensions sometimes, but the best example of a first-person omniscient unreliable narrator I can think of in quote-unquote real adult literature is Humbert Humbert from Nabokov's Lolita. These characters are nothing alike in any other way, and the stakes aren't nearly as high, so don't roll your eyes too hard at me. I know that I'm being ridiculous. But in Lolita, it's essential that you read the text knowing that Humbert is a master of manipulation and of propaganda, and that if you're not careful, he'll have you believing, as many actual critics and film producers apparently do, that Lolita is some kind of romance. This is the real danger of Humbert Humbert, is in his ability to sway people over to his side, and it's the real danger of persuasion in general. Our tendency to be brought in by beautiful words and beautiful thoughts. Now, Mommy's manipulation of the story just gets everyone the cat that they want with less fighting, so obviously very different, right? But if we read her character as being willing to engage in a transactional storytelling economy, then we realize that everything prior to her adopting the cat was just performance, purely performative. She knew that the family all had ideas they wanted heard, so she gave them space for them to be voiced. She never had any intention, though, of entertaining them. It would always come down to the cat she picked, which she was confident would be the best one in the situation. This is how you should adopt a cat, by the way, as we all know. And this is the kind of peacekeeping work that mothers do all day long without recognition. The most amusing part of it, for me, probably, is her trying to convince us at the end that Blizzard couldn't be their kitten. Note the slippage in the pronouns here. He couldn't be our kitten, but I felt sorry for him. As soon as I picked him up, I loved him. He was snuggly, he was smart, nothing else mattered. This was our kitten. He couldn't be our kitten. I loved him. This was our kitten. I think that says everything that we need to say. And bravo for Mom for taking control of things. So on to the scoring. Illustrations come in at a 3.6. Part of me wonders if I don't have some kind of a digital roadblock up somewhere, because I really have no qualms with any of this. It's cozy, warm, the kittens are all adorable. Chickassee's faces are nearly minimalist, but she wrangles a lot of expression out of the smallest details, and through well-planned outfit and prop changes, these really seem like characters with fully developed internal lives. The story is a 3.8, which is edging into rarefied territory because the images and words really do give us a cozy moment of home that feels welcoming and familiar. It's that veracity that gives me a little bit of pause. This is based on a true story, and of course shelters close down all the time. So I don't disbelieve that this happened, and the fact that it did happen makes it possible to include it in fiction, of course. But the side quest of the first shelter just feels like a disappointment that could be mitigated into something more instructive as it's turned into fiction. For instance, our local shelter rarely has cats cleared for adoption to families with young children. And when they do, they're often very senior cats, which creates its own set of problems. That might be a more believable lesson. But of course, that's just a small punching up. It's not a real grade. For repeatability, we have a strong 3.5. We only have a few days left to return this, and this is after our maximum number of renewals, so we've had it for quite a while. And I suspect that Addie will still be sad to see it go. Therefore, it's currently sitting on her list of books to buy as a result. We'll see if it actually ends up getting bought. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But she has loved this one. My own score is a 3.2. As pet adoption stories go, this one's a real gem. So many in this genre fall into the trap of changing mores over time, right? Dr. Seuss, the Berenstain Bears, they treat pets in a very different way than we do today. This story reflects our society's current relationship with pets fairly well. Whether that will continue to be the case, who knows? Berenstain Bears, of course, and Dr. Seuss were both talking about decades of time in between, so we can't excruciate them too much, but nevertheless, this is a much more usable work of fiction. Addie's score is a 3.9, and you may have noticed from the cold open that she's angling hard for a cat, aided by her aunt and uncle, who are a multiple cat family. We, however, have a mastiff who is approaching her elder years, and dedicated listeners will likely have heard her snores in the background before, and honestly, it would just be unfair of us to introduce that at this juncture. We have no idea how she would react. We have no idea how a cat would react. She's the gentlest girl in the world, but I'll tell you, she hates squirrels. And I don't know if she's going to be able to differentiate a tiny little cat from a squirrel. She's pretty big. But we are open to the idea later on. And so for an overall score of 18, currently 29th place behind some absolute heavyweights in children's literature. This is one to go get from the library, folks, and maybe even one to add to your collection. The only real reservation that I have about recommending this book in this moment is that where I live, summer is rapidly approaching, and this is a text full of winter coats and urban snow. But I also recognize that this is a time when many families will choose to adopt, and so it's as good a time as any. And is it ever really a bad time to teach kids about managing expectations, dealing with disappointment, and apparently about the dangers of unilateralism draped in the sheep's clothing of democracy? I don't think so. Listen, friends, thanks for listening. Stay safe. Get your kids to the library, and as always, keep on reading together. Bye, y'all.
This has been Toddling the Stacks. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube or your podcatcher of choice for new episodes every Monday, and follow us on Insta, Blue Sky, and Facebook for the latest updates. If you like what you hear, leave us a review. Keep up with Adeline's reading now, find links to buy your favorites, and more at toddlingthestacks.com. Address questions or concerns to pod, that's P-O-D, at toddlingthestacks.com. Graphics for today's show were created by Emily Tatro. Make a website so people can hire you, Emily. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.